Hello everyone and welcome back to another Blender beginner tutorial. Today I'm going to go over the basics of 3D animation inside of Blender, such as creating keyframes and some tools to speed up your animating process. First thing I'm going to do is press Shift and then A on the keyboard, come to Mesh, and I'm going to select Cube. Then I'll press G and then Z and then 1 to bring it up by 1. I'm now going to create a camera, so I'll press Shift and then A, then come down to camera. You may have some of these objects in your scene already, so you can just press A and then X and follow along with me, or you can just use the objects in your scene already. Then I'm going to press this button to toggle camera view, then I'm going to make sure this button, camera to view, is on, and I'll zoom out so I can see what I'm working with here. So I'm going to position my camera like this just now, and I'm also going to change my resolution from 1920 to 1920 to 1920 by 1080, which is what it is by default, so you will probably have it 1920 by 1080. I'll just position my camera there. Perfect. Now I'm going to go over adding keyframes and actually animating this cube. So I'll quickly turn off the move under the gizmo tab, and so I'm now going to add the keyframe to this object. So to do that, I'll press I on the keyboard, and as you can see, this menu comes up called Insert Keyframe, and here I can add a keyframe to the object for all these different things. So if I added one for the location, that would save the position of the object on the timeline based on its location. And the same applies for rotation and scale and all these other values. So let's add a keyframe for its location. So I'll press I and then I'll left click location. Then making sure under output properties my frame rate is at 30 FPS. I'm going to come over to frame 30 by dragging this blue playhead over to 30, and it'll just snap to that there. I'm going to come back to my cube, so hover over this menu here with my mouse, press G, Y, I'll just move it over here, then I'll press I, and then I'll left click location. Now if I set my end frame to 30, which means the animation will end here, I'll compare the two. But here's the animation we've made, so as you can see the cube moves. However, if I increased my end frame to around here, you would find that it takes a while for the animation to end. Hopefully you understand the difference between the two, but you will the more you use it anyway, but you will come to understand how all this stuff works the more you practice it. So essentially what FPS is how many frames are passing in each second. So in 1 second 30 frames will play, and each one of these numbers on the timeline represents a frame. Now one thing you'll notice, if I press R to rotate my object, press I and then location, then come back to 30, rotate the object again, press I and then location, you'll notice that the rotation will not change at all. This is because rotation is a different value. As you can see, I would need to set the rotation by pressing left click, and then I'll need to come to here, rotate the object, press I and then press rotation. Now when I play the animation, you can see the object rotates. But what if we wanted to just automatically save location, rotation, and even scale, which is making the object bigger or smaller, just by pressing the I button? Well, there is a way we can do that. All we need to do is come down to this panel called keying on the timeline. So make sure you're on the timeline here, which is the clock shape. Left click here to change it if it's different. Then under active keying set, I'm going to change mine to location, rotation, and scale. That's what I usually work with. Make sure this is on add and replace, and I'll left click this auto keyframe insert keying set. Now if I scale my object up, I can press I, and as you can see no menu came up, it automatically added the keyframes for scale. And it also added the keyframes for rotation and location again, if I had happened to change it. So I'll change the scale, I'll make my object smaller, then press I. Now when I play the animation, you can see it's rotating, moving, and getting smaller. So just so you guys can fully understand what I'm doing here, I'm going to select this keyframe here just by left clicking on it. When a keyframe is selected, it will be highlighted yellow. You also do not have to have the playhead over it to delete a keyframe. So I'll now just press X and then press delete keyframes. And I'll select this keyframe here and press X to delete keyframes. Now to return my object to where it was, I'm going to press Alt G, Alt R and Alt S, and I'll move it up by 1. There we go. I'm going to zoom in a little, and now I'm going to create an animation without having to worry about adding location, rotation and scale separately. I can do it just by pressing I. So I'll press I to create a keyframe. I'm going to increase the length of my animation to 45. Come to frame 45, press G, then Y, I'll move it across. Scale the object by 1.5. So just press S and then type 1.5. I'm also going to rotate this object, so press R, Z, and 45. That should do. Now I'm going to turn on this camera to view here by checking this box, and I'll zoom out a little bit more just so it's a bit nicer, and I'll press I on the keyboard, and that will save location, rotation, and scale for this object on the timeline. I'm going to increase the end of my animation from 45 to 90. I'm going to left click this first keyframe, so make sure this one isn't selected. If it isn't selected, it will be white like this, and when it's selected, it will be yellow. Then I'll just press Ctrl C, and I'll come to frame 90 and press Ctrl V. Because I want this to be an animation loop, I'm going to take it from 90 to 89, we'll loop round. I'll show you the difference. So here's the animation from 1 to 90. And then here's the animation from 1 to 89. As you can see, frame 1 is not repeated twice since 90 has the same keyframes as frame 1. Hopefully that makes sense to you, but you will understand it the more you do it. Finally, I'm going to show you how you can animate the camera. So keep camera to view on, and I'm going to come to frame 1, press I, and I will come to frame 45, zoom out with my camera, and I'll press I again. Come back to frame 1, left click it so it's the only thing going yellow, press Ctrl C while in the timeline, and I'll come back to frame 90 and press Ctrl V. Turn off camera to view, and now when we play our animation, our camera will move also. Very subtle, but demonstrates the point. Obviously you can rotate, scale, and move your camera just like you can any other object, so just remember that. There are a few other animation tools you can use, but I'm going to cover that in another tutorial, since I believe this is everything you should need to know for starting off with 3D animation. If that interests you, make sure to subscribe and put on the notification bell so you'll be notified when I make more of these animation tutorials and other general Blender tutorials. Just to finish off this tutorial, I'm now going to show you how to render out your animation. So the first thing you're going to need to do is come to Output Properties, scroll down to Output, and choose a folder here where you want to save all your images. So what I'll do is I'll left click this folder button, and in a place where I want, I'll just press this plus new directory to create a new folder, and I'll call this one tutorial 2, but for you that might be tutorial 1 depending if you've followed tutorial before. And I'll left click this one and then press accept. Everything here is all as it should be, so all I'm going to need to do now is inside of Eevee so I can save time. I'll press Shift A and I'll create a basic light source, just the sun, G and then Z. You can rotate it across the x-axis. If you haven't already, make sure you save your project just by pressing Ctrl and then S and then choosing a directory. And with that, let's go ahead and render this animation. So left click this render tab and just press render animation, and it will render from frame 1 to 89 in that folder I've chosen in the output. I'll come back when the animation is finished. Now the animation is finished rendering, I'm going to switch my editor type by left clicking it and then going to video sequencer. Then on my timeline, I'll come all the way back to 1. Again, I'll make sure I am operating on 30 frames per second. And now I'm going to add my image sequence. So I'll press add and then I'll left click image sequence. So first of all, I'll find my animation and I'll set my start frame to 1 and end frame to 89 as we set it in our timeline. I'll then click on tutorial 2 as that's where I saved all my images in the output. Left click number 1. Then I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, shift and then left click again, and that will select all 89 images. Then I'll press add image strip. Now what I need to do is come down to my output and I'm going to change it from file format PNG to FFmpeg video. The reason we don't do the initial animation as a FFmpeg is because if Blender crashes or we need to stop rendering for a break, the file won't be completely lost. We'll still have the images, so we'll be able to continue where we left off. However, if it was a video, that wouldn't work. I'll change my container to MPEG-4, change my output quality to high quality if it isn't already, make sure we're working on video codec H.264, and now I'm going to come up to render again and press render animation. But this time it's going to put all the images that we've already rendered into an image sequence, which can be played as a MP4 video. Now that's finished, we can view our video in your output folder, or You can preview it in here. You can just press view animation under render, and a new tab will come up, and now you can see we can preview animation. Now if you want to go back to rendering what's in the actual 3D viewport, which is this here, you'll need to delete the video image sequence first, because as long as there's something in this sequencer, Blender is going to prioritize rendering this over what's in the 3D viewport. So if I wanted to do that, I could just press X. I hope you found today's video useful. If you did enjoy it and want to see more videos like this, I have more beginner tutorials in the playlist, which is in the description of this video. If you want to be notified when I make more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. That way you can be notified whenever I make a new Blender tutorial or other video. Thank you again, and I'll see you all in the next video.